Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining the holiday wrap-up webinar. Today's presentation will focus on the highlights and trends from the 2018 holiday season. Now, I'd like to introduce your two speakers on the line. The first is John Fetto, who is our senior analyst, and joining John is Brad Menard, our digital insights analyst. I'll hand it over to John to kick us off. John, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lisa. And thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to jump right into it. As Lisa said, I have a lot of content to cover today. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold, so my voice is a little scratchy. So the first slide that we're looking at here is showing the total number of visits to the Hitwise Retail 500 on a weekly basis from November through December 2018 versus 2017. And these are an aggregation of the top 500 retail sites online as maintained by Hitwise over the years. And we can see that there was about a 2% increase in total number of visits year over year, with about 14.7 billion visits in aggregate over the entire season. We did see the top 2 weeks were the week of Thanksgiving and then the week of Cyber Monday, with the week of Thanksgiving surpassing over 2 billion visits, about 2.2 billion visits that week, and Cyber Monday falling just short of 2 billion visits with 1.9 billion visits that week. So we're definitely firmly in the 2 billion visit week now over the peak week season. If we were to look at transactions, in addition to just the total number of visits, we're looking at the top 50 retail sites for which Hitwise is tracking the online checkout page. So these are the pages that you arrive at after you're making a purchase on a site, which is basically the thank you for making a purchase page. And we're tracking that pretty consistently for the top 50 retailers. And this season, we saw about 472 million online transactions in total, which is about a 15% increase from 2017. I know that some of the people who attended our breakfast in New York, in which we previewed this webinar deck, commented on the fact that it was the longest holiday shopping season, meaning the largest number of days between Thanksgiving and Christmas that are possible during a holiday season, which is one reason that I think that purchases were probably up year over year. We also know that it was a really strong travel season with a lot of people traveling away from home for the holidays. And online transactions are a really great way to make your purchases at home, but have them shipped in advance. So the increase of those two, the combination of those two effects, were probably likely feeding heavily into the strong growth that we saw this year. One other thing that I think is interesting to point out is that we saw the top number of visits happening over the week of Thanksgiving and Black Friday. Last year, we saw the top number of visits happening right here in mid-December, the week ending December 16th. But this year, instead of that peak week, December 15th, quickly starting to drop off, we saw that it sustained itself over 2 weeks, which helps explain why it wasn't necessarily the top week of the year this year. But these two strong weeks of transactions happening late in the month or late in the holiday season really speak to consumers' desires to be purchasing later and later and closer to the Christmas holiday. I know it's been a while since we've had a really bad weather holiday season, so people haven't really been burned by packages not arriving in time. So they were willing to take another bit of leap of faith to try to purchase later and later. I know that not all retailers are really benefiting equally during these last few weeks, so we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but it just definitely shows the desire of people to purchase later and later in the season. If we look at plotting those visits, which is the greenish blue line here, versus the transactions here, you can see that they follow a similar trend, but transactions definitely had that peak. Which, if you can look at it in terms of conversion, you'll basically see that the conversion rate is much higher as people get closer to Christmas. And in fact, if we do plot the conversion rate week over week throughout the season, we see that the highest conversion rates were in those last 2 full weeks before Christmas, which were about 20% higher than they were the week of Thanksgiving and Black Friday. So the closer we get to Christmas, the more people are likely to be clicking the buy button. If we were to plot the cumulative visits in total across the holiday season, which is what we're doing here with these two straight lines, you can see that there's a pretty steady growth as we reach 100% of the season's visits. But then if we look at the share of seasonal growth that were registered in any given week, I think it's interesting to see here that the week of December 22nd, still there were 13% of the transactions that happened that week. So lots and lots of money still on the table for retailers to fight over. So anything that people can do to obtain a little greater share of that last minute holiday purchases, the better. In fact, as I alluded to before, a few retailers really benefited disproportionately during those final weeks, and those would be Amazon. I think primarily because people are used to shopping on Amazon and they know that they can rely on the 1 day or 2 day delivery promises that are made there. And then other sites like Apple, CVS, and Barnes and Noble also did proportionally better in terms of their seasonal sales in those last few weeks. So whatever those retailers are doing, I think Apple is probably doing a pretty decent job of doing click and collect, or buying online and picking up in stores, which is probably why their performances were so good that week. But we'll actually need to dig into a little bit more about what CVS and Barnes and Noble were doing to really profit from that boost of last minute transactions. So here's a chart that we've been producing for the past few years. It just shows week over week the number of transactions and the number of visits that were registered across the top sites. And I think the biggest thing to take away from this is when we started doing this, and this is my 5th year of doing the holiday wrap-up webinar, is that we used to see this big spike, kind of like we were seeing here for the week of the 25th on Cyber Monday. We'd see a pretty decent size spike every Monday throughout the season, and then it would slowly recover, only to peak again the following Monday. But we're really not seeing that anymore in terms of visits and in terms of transactions. We're seeing pretty much that people are shopping every day of the week, and people are buying every day of the week. So if we were to plot the top traffic and conversion days on this chart, you can see obviously the top traffic days and the top conversion days are really highly centered around peak week. The number one traffic day was Black Friday. The number one purchase day, though, was Cyber Monday. But then another interesting point to make is that there's this lull here, the first full week of December rather, and I think that has to do with one, the season got started earlier than ever. I think with Black Friday sales being offered for an entire week. And then Cyber Monday sales were also extended for the entire week of Cyber Monday. So by the time people were done with like these 2 weeks, they were kind of taking a break and just maybe looking around, but not necessarily breaking any records in terms of visits or transactions. But then once we started getting in the final 2 weeks of the season, people were starting to buy more with 5 or 6 of the total of the top traffic days or purchase days occurring during those last 2 weeks of the year. And then we get to Christmas Day, the day after Christmas, and the 27th, also being high for traffic. Most of those are probably redeeming gift cards and looking for after Christmas sales, not necessarily buying online. And if we were to take that same data from the previous slide and stretch it out over the entire season, this is what it would look like instead of looking at it week by week stacked. So you can see definitely top number of visits or transactions happening on Cyber Monday and then in Black Friday. And then the top number of visits were actually on Thanksgiving Day and Black Friday. And then you see later in the season, from about the beginning of December, fairly steady increases in the total number of transactions up until about the 17th or so of December. And then after that, daily transactions really started to decline until we got into just like the day before Christmas. And then they started to rebound just a little bit at the visits. But we can see that steady growth in traffic happening, or in purchases happening throughout the month of December. So the next question is kind of where is all that traffic going to? And the easy answer is really to Amazon. We saw the Amazon, among the top 50 retailers, Amazon gained about 42% of the traffic share during the month of November and December. And that was up, I think, from about 40% last year. When we saw Walmart, Apple, Target, Best Buy, Home Depot, and Kohl's really kind of rounding out the top 5 there. And then we also saw, interestingly, aside from Amazon going up, we saw Walmart, Apple, Target, Best Buy were really more or less flat in terms of visit growth year over year. And where we did see more growth was a little bit further down. We saw CVS's traffic was up 41% year over year. Wayfair's traffic was up 32% year over year, which helped propel them into the top 15. Bed Bath & Beyond had also a really good year, up 20% in terms of traffic. Costco, Macy's, Lowe's, a lot of the other sites kind of down here in the 10 to 15 spots really did a disproportionately greater share of the growth, within the top 4 for the top 5 outside of Amazon really showing pretty flat years of visit growth. So outside of the top 15, I just thought it'd be worthwhile focusing on a few other retailers that we haven't really talked about. Chewy had a really good year. They came in number 21 overall, and their visits were up 49% year over year. Advanced Auto Parts were also up 39% over the last year, and they came in number 52. And Tractor Supply Company was up 20% year over year, coming in at number 36. And the presence of Advanced Auto and also Tractor Supply Company to some degree really, I think, speaks to this continued trend we've been seeing of men coming online more and more during the holiday season. Auto stores have really benefited from this trend, with auto stores being kind of the sites that enjoy the greatest year-over-year increases among outside of our top performers list. So if we look at just the conversion rates of the top 15 retailers that we were looking at before, we can see that Amazon's not only taking the largest share of visits, but they also have the highest conversion rate overall as well, with about 7.5% of visits resulting in a purchase. The second best performer is Kohl's, all the way back down at 4%. We can see that Target and JCPenney had the next highest conversion rates at about 3%. And then Apple and Lowe's and Home Depot kind of were down there in last place. These are probably items that people are more used to picking up in stores or making reservations online and then going to, pick them up themselves instead of waiting for them to be delivered. So knowing that Amazon's conversion rate was so great, it's no surprise that their share of the transaction pie is even greater than their share of the visit pie. In fact, they accounted for 72%, almost 72% of the season's transactions, at least in terms of the share of the top 50 retailers, which is just, an astounding figure. Last year, I think that was just about 70%. So Amazon is gaining an even larger share of the season's transactions every year. And then there are only a handful of retailers that are really able to even crack 1% or more of purchases. And those are Walmart, Target, Kohl's, Best Buy, Apple, and Home Depot. And those were the same members of the 1% club that we saw last year. So nobody new joining that list this year. The other thing I think that's really important to notice is that 40 million Americans bought only from Amazon this season, and that's among the top 50 retailers at least. We looked at the percentage of people who bought from Amazon and no other of the 49 top retailers, and that reached 40 million, and that was up from about 38 million last year. So not only is Amazon gaining a greater share of the pie, but more and more people are only buying from Amazon. They might be visiting other sites, but they're not actually transacting online. They might be visiting them in store, but when it comes to online, they're just not getting their share of the dollars. And then if we were to look at just like the best overall converters, not regardless of kind of their size of transaction volume, we still see that Amazon was number one. Shutterfly used to be number one last year, but their conversion rate dropped pretty decently from 7% down to about 5% this year. Chewy was a newcomer to the list this year and showed up really strong with about 5% of the season's conversion, or 5% conversion rate for the season rather. And then traditional performers, we see these other sites pretty much routinely in our mix of top converting sites. Kohl's, Victoria's Secret, Bath and Body Works, LL Bean. These we see year over year. So then this is also kind of a slide that we make sure to point out every year. So where is that traffic going to the top retail sites? Where is it coming from? And the easy answer is that search engines are driving the largest share by far of that traffic, and it's about 43% this year, which is down. I mean, just slightly year over year, but it's pretty consistently in that 40 to 43% range. Email services are actually down again this year, and this is actually not so much a story of the waning importance of email as much as it is a story of the increasing role of mobile. People are still interacting with brands through email, but if you think about your own use of email, where are you primarily opening your emails? It's probably from your phone, and you're probably using an email app or the native email app on your phone to open it. And Hitwise data is measuring web-based traffic, so browser-based traffic. So it just shows that a smaller and smaller share of clicks to retail sites are coming from email websites. So, but it's really telling us that they're opening their emails more on their phones. And that means that if you're interacting or engaging your customers via email, you have to really understand that the primary way that people are going to interact with and click through to your site or offer is going to be a mobile site via a mobile device. So making sure that everything from the readability of the email to the purchase process is seamless and operates very smoothly on a mobile device. The other final thing to point out is that we saw that department stores, house and garden, apparel and accessories, these are other shopping sites. They were up just slightly, so there's still more and more cross shopping, so people visiting one retailer and then going over and visiting another. But the rewards and directories subcategory of the shopping industry was down just slightly last year. And I think that this is largely due to the existence of browser plugins. And so if you're thinking, how many of you have like an Ebates or a Honey plugin in your browser, that'll just tell you whether there's a discount or a deal to be had from a site instead of requiring you to go and search for coupon codes and whatnot. It just tells you. So I think that's a reflection of more and more people installing these plugins, and that's also something to be aware of. So if we look at just like the mobile share of traffic, where is that traffic coming from? So 58% of visits to the Hitwise Retail 500 now are coming from mobile devices, which is higher than the all industry average. Among the top 10 sites, a strong majority of them are getting more than half of their traffic from mobile, but 8 out of 10 of those sites are getting 60+% of their traffic from mobile devices. In fact, only Amazon and Apple are receiving less than 60% of their traffic from mobile devices. And that, I think, is largely due to the fact that Amazon has a really strong and very well-established mobile app. And again, the Hitwise data is focusing on mobile and web browser traffic. And so that just means that the difference here is probably what percentage of people are making purchases or making visits on Amazon's mobile app. And the same thing with Apple. It's ingrained in their OS system where you have an Apple Store app, so people can easily navigate through the Apple Store on their phone through the app, so they don't need to go to their browsers for that. And then along the lines of mobile data, I think we talked about this last year as well, but I think it's really interesting to note and remember that near me searches are growing every year. And we've seen this going back at least all the way to 2015. And the holiday season and the back to school season is when those numbers generally tend to peak each year. We see more and more people searching for things near me and understanding the opportunities that you can gain by targeting some of those near me searches with telling people, what are your opening hours? What types of merchandise do you have in store that they may be searching for? And this is all going to be a positive tool for converting more of that traffic to in-store visits. In fact, if we looked at near me, the top near me searches during the holiday season this last year, we saw that many of them are actually branded searches. Walmart near me was one of the most popular, CVS near me, Target, Walgreens, Starbucks, McDonald's. People are looking for known retailers and known restaurants around them. So you could also use something like that to prospect against. If you're a competitor to CVS or Walgreens, you could be prospecting to let them know that there's another store that sells something very similar to what those retailers sell, also nearby. Interestingly, on Thanksgiving Day, this is relative. These are the top keywords used in near me searches. Open was the top keyword used in those searches, and people were 10 times more likely to use the word open in their near me searches on Thanksgiving Day than the week prior. So people are just looking to know if anything near them is open, but specifically they're looking for restaurants near me that are open, stores, food near me, sales near me. We also see that people are looking for liquor stores and other types of things where they can just run out to grab something or escape their family for a few hours to get through the holidays. I think this is also some really interesting stuff that you can take into your campaign planning for 2019. And now I'm going to hand it over to Brad, who's going to take us into like a deep dive on some of the peak week trends that we saw this year.
Yes, thank you, John, and hello, everyone. So we're going to take a look at peak week, which we're describing as, of course, the Thanksgiving through Cyber Monday weekend. And we'll also be taking a little bit of a look at the Wednesday and Tuesday afterwards, since it's known as Giving Tuesday. And then we'll drill into some of our Amazon peak week data as well, just to take a look at some category and product level insights there. But looking at the whole peak weekend or peak week as a whole, we can see that obviously Thanksgiving, Black Friday, and Cyber Monday, the traditional shopping holidays with the highest number of visits, and of course Black Friday topping out just 8 million more visits than Thanksgiving with Black Friday. And then overall is each individual day up for the visits themselves by about 2% versus the year before. So not too much has changed, but there is just a slight increase in that overall traffic. But when we start looking at the total number of transactions, we see a much more different growth story. Of course, Thanksgiving, Black Friday, Cyber Monday are the main focus days where those transactions are happening. But across the board, double-digit growth in terms of the actual number of transactions, so purchases actually happening on those days. And when we look at the main 3 days, we see about a 13-14% increase in transactions. But I think the real story here is that the peak week is certainly expanding beyond just Black Friday and Cyber Monday. We can see the 24th and 25th there at 19 and 16% growth as well, and then Giving Tuesday growing as well. But as the brick and mortar stores start opening earlier and earlier, and the Black Friday, Cyber Monday sales expand or are continuous throughout the weekend, a lot of those sales are starting on Wednesday now, and we can see that 40% increase in sales on the Wednesday before. So people are not waiting to get their deals; they're taking full advantage of them as soon as they can. So taking a look at how much of that big pie that we were looking at with Amazon's share, how that changed over the course of the week, we can see the week leading up to it. Things were fairly steady, where we have the blue line for just total number of visits share versus the top 500 retailers in Amazon in Hitwise, and the share of transactions against the top 50 retailers where we were measuring purchases. We can see the visits line not changing too much. Amazon still maintaining the lion's share of visits, although visit share was yielded a little bit to some of those other retailers, dropping from about 28 to 22%. But Amazon's share of transactions, despite its juggernaut status, with about 71% of purchases in terms of share across those top retailers, dropping off to about 47% the actual Thanksgiving day. So the message to retailers that aren't Amazon is pretty clear that there is definitely an opportunity for you to convert more customers on those days, because people are going where the deals are, and you are winning against Amazon. And of course, as we move through the rest of the weekend, the visits themselves sort of leveling off compared to what we saw previously, but the actual share of transactions rising back up a little bit over the weekend when not as much is going on. Cyber Monday dropping off again as other retailers are emphasizing those deals. But it doesn't ever really, if we were to expand this graph all the way through the end of the season, we'd see that Amazon's share of purchases or transactions don't actually return to those pre-holiday levels until the end of the season. So other retailers certainly taking away some of that transaction share from Amazon. So speaking of Amazon, let's take a look at what's actually happening on Amazon, since they are more than half of the transactions happening during this time period. So looking at just a very high category level, we can see, no surprise, electronics and home and kitchen, very popular Black Friday sales categories, and toys as well, as the overall top categories. But more importantly is looking at that weekend lift, and we actually see that half of the top 10 categories, and especially Amazon's devices there, the 10th rank there, outpaced the overall holiday weekend sales lift. So Amazon actually saw a 68% lift in total sales for these particular days compared to the week before, and these are the categories that outpaced it, and especially Amazon's own devices. So as we drill in a little bit deeper, obviously individual product categories are going to float up to the top. So where we saw electronics, the number one category in terms of sales, when we look at what had the largest lift over the holiday weekend, it's actually something very, very analog. And specifically, that's DNA test kits, so like your Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, those types of kits, at over 1,300% of an increase in growth. And following that, transitioning back into something more electronic, but still considered health and wellness, is fitness trackers, so like your Fitbit type devices, almost 10xing their sales just for that particular weekend. And then as we reveal the rest of the list here, we start seeing more of those electronic types of categories with, once the slide populates here, we'll see the electronics categories, consumer electronics, media and entertainment start to show up more, where we also see video games starting to pop up as an individual component there. And of course, calling out the Amazon devices as its own category, it's still that 500% growth is top there. So let's take a look at some of those Amazon devices and see exactly what was driving that. And I mean, the headline here says it all is that Amazon's putting themselves first. If you happen to be on that website during that weekend, the first thing you probably saw featured was Amazon's own devices. And when we start looking at the top products that were sold, so not even category, just individual SKUs that were being sold, Amazon's products actually took up 7 of the top 10 spots. So, Amazon's not just a retailer, they're a manufacturer, and they're going to put their own assets first, which when we look at just how many devices take up those top 10, and as we look at the rest of the list, Amazon is going to always put themselves first, but there's still plenty of room for other retailers to succeed on that shared space. When we look at the other top 20 items in the top 25, we start to see some of the hot video game items, which is a Black Friday staple with the Nintendo Switch and Sony PlayStation memberships. Memory cards, I like to think of this as the next generation of batteries. It's very commoditized. So many of our electronic devices require those, and Samsung and SanDisk taking over the top sales for those. Of course, the Instant Pot, the hit sensation of the home and kitchen space, taking over both the 9 and 11 spot with the two sizes of the Instant Pot. And those combined actually would have put it into, I believe, number 5, if I remember correctly. Next up, we see the Ancestry and 23andMe kits. Obviously, huge growth from those, but heavy feature in terms of those brands being waiting for the holiday weekend to go on sale. And then we also see some smart home devices, especially the Ring, which, while not necessarily an Amazon branded device, was purchased by Amazon earlier in 2018. So it's no surprise to once again see an Amazon-backed device breaking into the top 25. So something that we didn't actually see in the top 25, but certainly was the number 3 overall category for sales is toys and games. And obviously, as we go into the holiday buying season, toys are always the big gift. But when we look at what's actually selling within that category, just looking at some of those toy subcategories, we can actually see that for the most part, after the LOL Surprise series of toys, specifically this 7 Surprise doll, is mostly board games and party games and things like that. So we actually see the Amazon category of grown-up toys, which is categorized or comprised mostly of party games and not so family-friendly board games. So like your Cards Against Humanity, your more complex games like Catan and Pandemic. When we combine those, board games were the #1 seller, and because these specific board games were driving most of those sales, that whole category became #1. Whereas we see something like the building toys with our lighter blue line is #2 with the overall trend, but because those things are made up of so many more SKUs, in aggregate, still couldn't even touch the volume of these few individual board games. Excuse me. So, let's look at this another way. So on the left here, we just have a list of some of the top brands of toys that were sold through the peak week. And so where we saw those building toys was the 2nd overall category. Lego, far and away, more than twice the volume of the next brand because of the extremely large assortment and the giftability of a lot of the branded merchandise they have was by far the #1 brand. But as we start looking down the rest of the list, we're going to actually use Mattel here as a case study. We could see #4, #7, and #10 in terms of top 10 brands being sold are all Mattel brands. So to the right, where we look at the chart, we're now looking at day by day overall share of the toy category of Mattel's brands. And we can see that big, huge, just mountain of share on Black Friday. And individual brands like Fisher-Price, Barbie, and Hot Wheels, because they were the top brands over the weekend and so well focused, actually took up or ate up an additional 4% of all toys being sold on Amazon just because of its heavy feature on Black Friday. So when we look at the rest of the week, we can see it doesn't quite come back down. And Cyber Monday, not really anything special compared to some of the weekends and the days before Thanksgiving. So there's 2 ways to look at this. If I'm Mattel, or if I'm not Mattel, what were they doing on Black Friday to succeed so well on Black Friday itself? Was it that they did heavy discounting? Was it that they made sure that they were best featured on the holiday buying guides or any sort of hot product or lightning deals page? And looking at that the other way around is, if I'm Mattel, I did absolutely great on Black Friday. Is my solution something that I can take up an extra 4% of share on Cyber Monday as well? Can I make lightning strike twice? Or is it that my strategy only works because we heavied up on one day? So 2 different ways to look at the toy strategy there. A side category to toys, of course, is video games, which would have been number 12 on the overall major category list. And of course, it's not Black Friday without talking about video game consoles. And so as we look across each of the individual days, of course, we see practically double the sales in terms of Thanksgiving, Black Friday, and Cyber Monday, but with the 2.3 million purchases. But something to note here is when we look at adding up the entire weekend, we're looking at Sony in the blue here on Thanksgiving and Black Friday, where we can see that they're beating out Nintendo in the red here, and Nintendo heavying up a little bit more in terms of sales on Cyber Monday. But when we average that out for the full week, Nintendo actually has the better overall sales share of sales. And so something to keep in mind here is that when you're planning for Black Friday, you want to ask yourself, do I want to plan for just Black Friday or just Cyber Monday, or do I want to be able to have a plan for the entire weekend as more and more shoppers are expanding through the weekend? And something else to look at here too is with the green is all of the Xbox consoles and games and things like that. And we can look at how it's about 17% share on the major shopping days. But when we look at Wednesday and Sunday specifically, that share drops off considerably at 14 and 13%. So Xbox is another example here of like, sure, we did great on the 3 main shopping days, but there's still people shopping the full weekend. What am I doing to maintain my share of sales throughout the weekend? So let's take a look at a completely different category. So health and beauty, much more CPG focused. Obviously not the main or the first thing that may come to mind for most brands in terms of a Black Friday deal. So here we're looking at the share of different subcategories within the health and beauty space. We've omitted oral care here just because electric toothbrushes are a considerably popular item on the holiday weekend, so we've just keeping it easy to look at the rest of these categories here. So we can see that it's fairly static in terms of how much share there is. There wasn't any one big blow up of category sales, but where each of those percentages are in those colored spaces for the different categories represents what the best share day was for those categories. So we could see luxury beauty, tools and accessories, and fragrances are the only ones that actually peaked up during the peak weekend. And specifically, these are categories that are giftable. Luxury beauty includes high-end skincare, fragrances, a popular holiday gift, and tools and accessories, which are things like hair dryers and straighteners and skin brushes and things like that, certainly prone to being people waiting for discounts there, whereas the rest of the category, if you're more of a regular CPG, fast-moving consumer goods type of category, there's 2 ways to look at this. This is either, people are still buying, but not necessarily in any special way for the peak weekend, or maybe my brand can be the one to start the new trend of also taking advantage of the increased foot traffic that people are shopping for gifts. They may still want things for themselves while they're still shopping. And so, of course, another big part of the CPG and the Amazon ecosystem is food and grocery, and specifically Amazon Fresh. And when we compare the week of peak week versus the comparable week right before it, we see a very different trend in the types of things that people are purchasing in terms of groceries and food. And so here we're looking at the overall lift of sales for the week of peak week. And when we look at the 3 categories that actually saw a lift, food and beverage gifts, no surprise there, candy and chocolate and beverages. So, giftable items and things that are probably leaning a little bit more towards party goods and being able to entertain guests and things like that. When we look at that dark red section there, what we're seeing is, short shelf life items that might be more associated with something like an Amazon Fresh or a same-day delivery, breads and bakery, dairy, fresh flowers, produce, things with very short shelf life. So something to consider here is, if you're in the food space, am I doing something that, or am I a fresh food, or am I a weekly staple product? Because people who may be subscribing to Amazon Fresh or relying on this type of service for fresh food, they're out of town, they're not home, they're modifying their subscriptions to not be getting these products during the weekend, whereas things like snack foods at -4, that's still fairly flat. They're looking for herbs and seasonings also at -4. So, they prepared for the holiday weekend, but now they're traveling. They're not home. They're at friends and family's houses. They've traveled home. Fresh food, certainly a change in consumer habits for that week. The types of foods that did actually succeed overall in terms of lift from the holiday weekend, multi-pack deals. So believe it or not, a popcorn seasoning came up as the top in lift, but we also see 2 of the top 5 are K-Cup coffee packs, which where the Instant Pot was the hot item this year, Keurig's was still very popular in terms of a home appliance that was being purchased, and no surprise to see the complimentary coffee being keeping up with that. But Kraft Easy Mac is a great example of here's consumers that are looking for a deal. If this item was heavily discounted, take advantage of those eyeballs that are there. We see all of this extra traffic from gift shoppers, but people may still be doing regular shopping, so don't be afraid to promote your own products there that weekend. And then, of course, at the end there with the Planters mixed nuts, seeing some of those snack foods that for people who are doing holiday entertaining, those kinds of goods are going to jump up. And last but not least, of course, it's not Black Friday unless we talk about TVs, because who doesn't love a Black Friday TV deal? And of course, when we look at the different size rankings, we're going to see a few different stories here. So looking at TVs under 32 inches, the green slice there at 36, over a third of the sales, is actually the Best Buy Insignia brand, which, if you're not familiar, Best Buy actually worked out a partnership deal with Amazon to have those TVs featured. But when we look at the 32 to 54-inch TVs, we see a completely different brand mix here, with the dark blue representing Toshiba, and at 44%, nearly half of the sales. And of course, the size of the pie as well, representing the almost 3x in terms of sales of units in that size. And then again, as we move into the large TVs at 55 inches, again, a completely different brand mix, with Samsung leading the way and much fewer brands represented at that size. Now, something that you may not have noticed is there's that pink wedge in each of those pies. TCL is number 2 in each of these size positions. Most well represented and most consistent brand between all of these, and that's because TCL is the value play on Amazon. So where we were talking about the heavy discount of featuring other CPG items, here's a brand that is doing consistently just because it's well represented in all categories, and where there may have been a strategy for one particular size or just a product assortment for Toshiba and Samsung and Insignia to focus on Amazon on that one size. The more you can get represented across Amazon, with TCL here being across all the size categories, it comes in solidly at a number 2 of share of all TVs. And I believe that actually wraps it up for our Peak Week section. So if that's the case, John, I will toss it back to you for going over the hot products.
Thanks, Brad. Try to regain a little bit of my voice here. So if we want to look at the top products, I think the best way to enter this analysis is just to see, as we said before, with 70+% of transactions happening online during the holiday season, happening on Amazon, we can see these are the top categories that people are making purchases within on Amazon. This is going to tell us probably where they're making most of their purchases online anyway. So home, garden, and tools accounted for the largest share of purchases on Amazon during November and December. We also saw electronics and computers and office being a close second, books and audible being a little bit third, beauty, toys, and movies, music, and games. We know movies, music, and games especially were really strong this holiday season. If we wanted to look at how that trended year over year, so November, December 2017 versus 2018, it's interesting. We saw that services and handmade didn't even rise above 1% of total purchases this holiday season, but they were up over 60% year over year. So services, just for those of you who aren't really aware, these are like the kind of Amazon will come and hang your television, or will come and set your home up for Alexa services, make sure your light bulbs talk to your speakers and whatnot. These are things that kind of compete against what Best Buy has been offering for years in their Geek Squad. So Amazon is starting to compete in that space. When it comes to handmade, this is also an area that is still not performing really strongly on Amazon, but it is one that we're taking more and more focus on as it competes. They start to go head to head with something like an Etsy, where you're looking at makers selling their goods directly on Amazon, and those are both up very considerably year over year. Credit payments and products, these are really dominated by gift cards, and more people are buying Amazon gift cards every year. This automotive and industrial section here, as we talked before, auto stores are among the fastest growing sites overall. So it's no surprise that we saw pretty strong growth in Amazon's auto and industrial department over this holiday season. It's also interesting, as people come to Amazon traditionally for home and electronics items, and once they spend more time on Amazon, they start to pay attention to the other things that they can be buying there. And that makes sense that these secondary categories that maybe didn't attract them as shoppers in the first place are starting to show more and more growth year over year, including the clothing, shoes, and jewelry section, which we want to definitely keep our eye on. The top categories are still showing, a decent amount of growth, but they're showing flatter growth, obviously, because they dominate so much the marketplace. Movies, music, and games were actually down this year, and I think that's driven primarily by the movies and music section, because we saw that games were up among one of the top selling categories, I think number 12 overall, and we saw games being the hot product every week almost throughout the season. And food and grocery was also down year over year, which I thought was interesting. Maybe people are giving like the Walmarts and the Krogers and the other grocery delivery services or retailers that'll allow you to pull up and they'll load your groceries into your car on your way home from work or school. Maybe people are starting to explore those services a little bit more than just going and getting everything from Amazon. So we wanted to look at the hot individual products. So we're looking at this a few different ways because I think it's important. In the past, we've usually identified hot products by what people are searching for on search engines. And that's what we're looking at here. So over the entire 2-month period, how many people were searching for these exact search variations? So we saw 1.4 million people search for Fallout 76 during the months of November and December, making it the top hot product overall by far this holiday. We saw 1.1 million people searching for Nintendo Switch, making it a strong number 2. Vans, number 3 at 880,000. Red Dead Redemption at 693,000. So I want to mention that these 2 games made it into the top 10 overall for the season. But for any given week of the holiday season, we saw a rotating list of the hot products being games. So as a game would release, it would jump up into the top 10 for a week or 2 weeks or more, and then it would fall out. But these 2 were in there consistently and dominated throughout the season. I think at any given point, we saw at least 4 games in the top 10 overall, but none of them held on like these 2 did this year. Fitbit is number 5 this year, and I think it's interesting to compare it to Apple Watch. Last year, we saw Apple Watch was the preferred, the hotter wearable technology, and which made sense as we saw the Fitbit becoming closer and closer, entering into like the smartwatch category. And as it did, Apple Watch really stood out. But I don't know if Fitbit is kind of playing more to its core fitness audience and trying to downplay some of the overall smartwatch capabilities. But they did manage to outperform Apple Watch in terms of search this holiday season. Speaking of Apple, though, we saw Apple, AirPods, and the iPhone XR were pretty strong this whole holiday season. I think we saw the iPhone 10 being a little bit stronger last holiday season, but this is the second year in a row that a phone made it into the top 10. So I think phones are still becoming pretty hot and extending their life cycle outside of the initial launch phase. And then we see streaming devices like Roku and then PlayStation. Even though it's 4 years without a major update, PlayStation is still doing really well with 436,000 people looking for it last year, or over the season, that is. And then the other way that we want to look at hot products is looking at what people are searching for on Amazon, because we know that more and more people are just foregoing Google and other search engines and going straight to Amazon for all of their retail searches. So, and interestingly, what they're searching for on Amazon is not necessarily what they're searching for on Google, as referenced by the number of hot searches here. Obviously, we saw Nintendo Switch and PS4, carrying over from both lists, and Fitbit as well. But the rest of these are really kind of different items. In fact, the Apple Watch and AirBuds and iPhone XR weren't on here, but the iPad was. We also saw Instant Pot and air fryer, obviously demonstrating the attraction of these holiday season sales offerings. The Instant Pot was huge last Christmas and during Prime season, Prime Day last year, and it was hot again this year with over 1.7 million unique searches happening. And then, as I mentioned before, the growing importance or the growing favorability of gift cards on Amazon. In the last week of the holiday season, I think we saw no less than 3 separate variations of the top 10 searches focusing on Amazon gift cards. So we had millions of people looking for Amazon gift cards, especially in those final weeks and days of the holiday season. So that's just more money than Amazon's able to bank, that they know that people are going to be spending throughout the year to come. And then the final one would just be wireless earbuds and laptops. So a little bit more generic searches. So also evidence that people are just looking more broadly on Amazon than they are right now on search engines. And then, of course, we look at toys. Now, in the years past, we did this by looking at searches that drove traffic to Toys R Us. Obviously, we can't do that anymore. So what we did was we looked at people who were conducting searches within the toy industry, the toy category on Amazon. And if you're at all familiar with the way searches work on Amazon, and I'm sure all of us are, when you type in a search like Lego or Nerf gun on Amazon, Amazon will suggest, hey, do you want to look in the toys and games department? And we were able to isolate that out in our Hitwise data to see exactly which department people are searching in. So we filtered the results by those that were conducted specifically within the toys and game department to tell us what items are toys. And we can see that Lego and Legos, 2 different ways of searching for that brand, were occupied 2 spots in the top 5. Nerf gun was number 2. Board games was number 4. I think, or number 5 rather. I think a quick view of this chart really tells us, though, that traditional toys were really back this year. I mean, aside from LOL Surprise and like Squishies, these are pretty traditional time-proven toys. And we didn't see a toy like, Hatchimals or Fingerlings, whereas in years past, we would see like the top 3 spots dominated by Hatchimal, Fingerlings, and LOL Surprise, or even multiple variations of those products being represented among the top 10. So the standout for me looking at this list this year is just the traditional toys really kind of making a comeback this year, and no big, trendy toys that people have to fight over each other in the aisles of their local retailer to get their hands on. And then I think we haven't really covered books, but I think with Amazon being so strong, I think it gives us a really good way to see, what were the top books? What are people reading, or what are people buying to give as gifts during the holiday season? And this is looking only at the total number of purchases on Amazon during the month of December. It still gives us an idea of, how many were downloaded over the holiday season. But when it comes to kids' books, because plenty of kids receive books this holiday season, The Wonky Donkey was number 1 with 114, either purchases a physical book or a digital download made during the month of December. The Unofficial Harry Potter Cookbook was number 2, a fairly distant number 2 after the Wonky Donkey. Diary of a Wimpy Kid is always kind of up there with 26,000 downloads or purchases of it in December. And then rounded out Dogman Brawl of the Wild, and Dragons Love Tacos, rounding up those top 5. And then we also looked at like the top cookbooks. As we saw before on a previous slide, Instant Pot was one of the top things that people were searching for, and it was also one of the top items purchased on Amazon over the holiday season. No surprise here that Instant Pot cookbooks are 2 of the hottest selling cookbooks that were purchased over in the month of December. And then Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat was one of the New York Times bestsellers, and also had a hit 4-episode series on Netflix, also doing really well, kind of a not too distant second from the top seller, that Instant Pot cookbook. And then we saw a couple other ones rounding out, but all those averaging about 20,000+ purchases during the month of December. And so that kind of takes us to the end, and I'm just going to wrap up with a few key points, and then we'll turn it over to Lisa if there were any questions, and we'll try to get to those before we have to wrap it up. The first 2 points, I'll load them at the same time because I think they are related. The peak week, as we saw, is the top week for visits and transactions again, but it's important to keep in mind the strength of the middle to late December timeframes. It's nearly tied for conversion for purchases, and people are more and more likely to be clicking the buy button as the holiday season approaches. And a lot of that, I think, is due to this desire to be purchasing later and later in the holiday season. We used to see that last minute peak really be tied to free shipping day. But I think now, more than ever, it's tied to guaranteed delivery date, because I think people can get free shipping, and they find that they can get free shipping via a lot of places, but it's really that guaranteed delivery that they're looking for. And as we said before, one place that they know or they can reliably get that guaranteed delivery is through Amazon. And that's why Amazon is getting a greater and greater share of those last minute purchases. So it's worth any brand really considering any way that they can possibly extend their shipping allowance and last minute shipping to get any piece of that final order volume that is possible. Keeping in mind that, there is going to be a bad weather season coming up, and people may start to recoil, but this year we didn't have that. And so I'm sure people will be, they're not going to be shell shocked next year. So they're going to try to push it as much as they can next year towards Christmas. Search engines obviously are still the top driver of traffic to retail sites. And last year we said that Amazon is becoming a shopping search engine, but now we say that Amazon is a shopping search engine, with registering almost as many, if not more, searches as official search engines like Bing and Yahoo. And also, as we learned, the searches that people are engaging in on Amazon aren't really reflective of what they're doing on search engines like Google. So one way to stay on top of things is to look at Amazon native search trends. And then obviously as Amazon continues to grow, and again, every year we do this webinar, I'm surprised to see how much momentum Amazon still has. We think that they must eventually reach a plateau, but they continue to grow and grow every year. But as Brad mentioned earlier, Amazon's top priority is to put their own products first. And so that includes their expansion into private labels. And we didn't talk about that here, but I would absolutely encourage you to watch this space here at Hitwise to look for some reports coming out in the coming months on private labels on Amazon, because as soon as a brand or a category really starts to take off and demonstrate staying power, it's not usually that long before Amazon enters its own private label into the space. But it's important, in the meantime, for manufacturers to really prioritize their relationships with Amazon to make sure that their items are featured and that they are well positioned to take advantage of private labels that may be introduced down the line. And then, as Brad demonstrated with the Mattel example and with the game example over peak week, it's a good idea to have not only a peak week strategy, so for the entire weekend, but also for individual days, because as we saw with Nintendo versus Sony, a brand's performance on any given day really can impact whether they win or they lose peak week. We saw that Nintendo really was able to make up just enough difference over the Saturday and Sunday shopping period that it helped them win the season or the week over Sony, which would have taken it away if you were just looking at Black Friday, Thanksgiving, and Cyber Monday. So it's important to have, both a high level view, but also being very focused on what are you going to do every day. And I would also say, pay attention to the day before Thanksgiving this year, because as we saw, the key growth dates were not only the off-peak days this year, but also specifically the day before Thanksgiving was the strongest day. And I expect that to continue to grow as those sales continue to move further and further out.